Melusine by Reid Chapter 27, The Chatelaine. Arrangements were made for the twins, and Roger and his parents flew to Bordeaux. From there, a smaller plane took them to La Rochelle. His father had to go anyway. The husband of the kindly-looking woman at the question-mark farmhouse was suing Roger's mother for damage to their wall, and Roger's father was going to see him to try to get him to drop the action in return for some money. He was not in the best of moods, though he was trying not to show it because he kept saying grimly, "Into each blasted life some blasted rain must fall." Roger and his mother were going to look for Melusine. Of course, Roger's father couldn't be expected to accept this plan without some argument. "If the police couldn't find her, how do you think you can? Maybe the police didn't look very hard, or maybe they looked in the wrong places. Where are you going to look that they haven't looked?" "I don't know yet. I'll know when I get there." "When you get where?" Roger said no more, but his mother gave his father a signal, and his father stopped arguing. Roger had a feeling about his mother. Roger had had a feeling about his mother ever since the night she had sat on his bed. She was now his friend and ally. She believed him. Once she said, "I think you've got some kind of special instinct about Melusine." He gained confidence from this because he agreed. He had a feeling that if Melusine were alive, the elastic pole might help him to find her. And she was alive. He was more sure of that all the time they were traveling toward France on the plane, and then by car toward the question-mark house. She was alive, or he wouldn't feel her pulling. It was faint at first, but he didn't feel it the same way in England. He didn't feel it the same way in England, and still fairly faint at Bordeaux. A bit stronger at La Rochelle, but maybe because he associated that town with her. But as they drove in another hired car the long way to the Poiters Road, he felt it more and more strongly, like an iron filling getting near a magnet, he thought. He felt better, much better. His mother noticed that his color had come back. His listlessness had gone. He strained forward in the car until his father, who was, as always, getting irritable from the long drive, told him to relax. He was making him nervous. They stopped for something to eat at Niort. Roger, who had almost forgotten what it felt like to have an appetite, found he was starving. The French food tasted familiar and delicious, eaten outdoors as if it were still high summer. And the French scene they ate near the market, and the sounds, sights, and smells were all of France. Felt almost like home to him. Both his parents were watching him, half anxious, half happy. "You're reinflating like a shriveled balloon," his father remarked. Roger hurried them over their meal, and they set off again. As they drove fast along the open road toward Poiters, Roger felt the pulse slacken, then tighten again sharply. He frowned, turning his head this way and that as if listening for a sound that he had been hearing closely, and now was fading. He reached forward, put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad!" "What?" "Can you stop a minute?" "What for? I can't stop here. Please, Dad." With a sigh, his father signaled and drew in on the shoulder of the road. He turned around. "Well, what?" I want to go back." "Back where?" "I don't know. We're going away from... Turn back, Dad, please." "Roger," his father began in an exasperated voice, "Brian, please, do as Roger asks." In a martyred silence, Roger's father backed the car and waited with ill-concealed impatience for a chance to cross the busy main road and go back the way they had come. They went nearly all the way back to Niort, about 20 miles, with his father simmering like a volcano, his mother nodding off to sleep, and himself tensely silent, listening. It wasn't quite listening. It was feeling the pull, testing it, going with it. They came to a right-hand turning with a vaguely familiar place name on a small signpost. "Dad, here, turn here." His father threw on the brakes and made the turn, muttering under his breath, and they drove on for a few more miles and saw another signpost. The car drew up next to it. "Roger," said his father, in an "I'm struggling to be patient, but it's all uphill" voice. "Do you realize where we are?" "Yes," said Roger in a queer, quiet voice. Where are we?" asked his mother, waking up. "Look," said his father, pointing to the signpost. "But that's the name of our village," which it was. The village nearest the chateau, where they had gone for their baguettes, wine, cheese, and fruit every day of the holiday. Roger, are you leading me back to that accursed chateau? Roger sat perfectly still for a moment, making sure, then he turned in his seat to face his father. Listen, Dad, why not? Where else would she go? She could have slipped away as soon as the crash happened. Just taken her case and run into the sunflower field and hidden. I thought she'd hidden at the time, when she could have set off and walked home. Walked home? Are you crazy? It's over 50 miles. Probably much more if she was avoiding the main roads. Roger sat quiet, frowning, figuring it out. Yes, he said slowly. Why not? We did a 12-mile walk at school every year. It was nothing. And she's healthy and strong. She could do it in a week, or a bit longer if she was hiding. She could sleep rough. She wouldn't mind that. But the minute she got there, the police would still be there. They wouldn't be looking for her at the chateau. They'd think like you, that she couldn't walk all the way. But I know she could. Nobody would think of looking for her there. This is fantastic, absurd. Why would she run back there the first chance she got? Maybe she didn't realize till she actually came away from it that she belonged there. I thought at the time, before, that she really didn't want to leave, that she didn't really want to live with us or go on to Canada. What made you think that? It was a perfect solution for her, and she never said a word against it. She agreed. Dad, you don't understand her. She knew it was a sensible idea. She wanted to want to do it, but she didn't. She didn't want to leave the chateau. She didn't tell me that because she knew she had to. She thought she had to, but she didn't want to. Why the hell not? She and her father lived there in absolute squalor. And her memories, I should have thought she couldn't wait to get it shut forever. I should have thought she couldn't wait to get shut of it forever. You said yourself it was the marvelous historical old place. You didn't like it when betrayed Gerard. Said it would be left to fall down, and it was her home, her family's home, back hundreds of years. Maybe she wanted to live there to save it. After all, she's the only one left who could. How can she save it, for God's sakes, Roger? She's only a child. She won't be a child forever, Roger's mother said unexpectedly. If she's there, that Gerard man can't sell it from under her. He'll have to consider her wishes. If she had some help, she might be able to restore it, or... The pair of you are swanning off into some cloud cuckoo land, shouted Roger's father. She hasn't any money. Even when her father, a grown man, was around, she couldn't save it. Her father didn't care, said Roger's mother. He was hopeless, you could see. He couldn't have done anything that needed any enterprise, any willpower, but Melusine... Her uncle has the money, interrupted Roger, getting more and more excited. She told me. If he's feeling guilty about her, maybe he'll feel guilty about the family home being sold or left to fall down. He'd be well ashamed if he knew she was struggling away all by herself. Maybe he'd help. Roger's father gaped at him. And do you seriously think that all this was in Melusine's mind as she was driving away from the place? That she was desperate to get back? That she'd run off, leaving you and your mother unconscious? This gave Roger pause. He had thought of everything, it seemed, but this. It hurt him to think of it. At the same time, he knew Melusine might easily do just that. There was a wildness about her, an untamed animal side. Still, she'd see her chance. She'd follow her instincts. She'd do what she had to do, escape, hide, get home. Later, perhaps, she would think and wonder and be sorry. You don't understand her, Roger said again. And what makes you so sure you do? Roger said, I feel it, that's all. There was a silence. His father gave a sharp sigh and rubbed his hand over his face. Then his mother said, Look, Brian, we're nearly there now. What's the harm in just looking? It'll put his mind at rest. Without a word, Roger's father led in a clutch. The chateau stood there in the evening sun, hiding its secrets. It looked completely abandoned. But one look was enough to prove to Roger it wasn't. He knew from something other than the pole, which had now stopped, she was here. The ladder had been moved, not put away, moved to another window, and that window was slightly open. The minute the car stopped, he was out. He ran straight to the ladder and began to climb it. He heard his father shout, but he ignored him. In a moment, he was up the ladder and had slid through the open window on the second floor of the main part of the building. He was in one of his chambres vides. The evening sun was streaming across. He was in one of the chambres vides. The evening sun was streaming across the floorboards. He looked down and saw her footprints in the dust, bare feet. Somewhere along that long, lonely walk, she had worn out her shoes or taken them off. He followed the footprints. They went out of the room through a half-open door. Roger followed. The corridor was half in darkness, and he couldn't follow the prints. At the top of the great flight of stairs, he paused. Yes, they were clear here. Down the curving steps, he could just make out the small imprints, and his eyes followed them across the flagstones of the great front hall. They didn't turn left toward the wing that had been occupied, but right toward the ruined tower, the vast empty ballroom. But then he saw that there were also the tracks of many footfalls going back and forth across the flags, making a well-beaten path in the dust through which the silvery sheen of the stones seemed to gleam, as she had paced the length of the hall, as if she had paced the length of the hall again and again. He clattered down, as if she were running ahead of him and he were chasing her. He ran down the main passage to the big door at the end, where she had once paused before throwing it open with a seemingly indifferent, "Voilà, le grand salon." When he got there, he paused. He was poised on the edge of suspense like pain, yet he didn't burst in. Instead, he knocked. "Melusine," he said, too softly for her to hear, because he seemed to have forgotten how to speak. Then he remembered, and banging on the door with a hollow, penetrating sound, he shouted, "Melusine!" He heard her steps coming from a distance, quick, running steps, and then the door opened, and there she was. He gazed at her, speechless with relief and happiness. He was only given a second, because then she did an incredible thing. She took 2 swift steps toward him and flung her arms around his neck and held him tightly. He closed his eyes and hugged her. He felt her small, painfully thin body trembling in his arms. She was here. She was all right. After a time, he opened his eyes and found himself looking past her. He lowered his arms and caught his breath in amazement. He was looking down the length of the great ballroom. It was no longer empty. It was furnished. Not with much. She hadn't had time or strength to bring much, but near one of the long inset windows, with their shutters folded back, there were 2 of the throne-like chairs from the big drawing room of the flat. There was the blue and red rug from the twins' room, a small marquetry table that Roger recognized held some of the beautiful books. One of them was open, as if she had been reading it. Her school books were heaped on the floor. There was a crystal jug of water, a dish of blackberries and hazelnuts, and incongruously, an open tin with a silver spoon sticking out. On a window seat was some bedding, including, as a bedspread, one of the tapestries that had hung on the drawing-room wall. No more squalor, thought Roger in a daze. No more grime and gloom, no more nuns' cells. The grandest room in the house, and all the beauty and luxury she could carry or drag into it to make herself feel like a Chatelaine. She had drawn back from him and was looking into his face. She had not had any beautiful clothes to put on. Apart from looking thinner, shabbier, and more fragile, she was the same as he remembered. Except her face. Her face was filled with a fierce determination. Her eyes burned, and the tears of relief and joy at seeing him didn't weaken their expression. "Roger," she said in her old commanding tone, "j'ai besoin de ton aide." "My help?" he said, still dazed. "With what?" "Le grand tableau," she said. "The table with the pictures. I want it. It will be here." She pointed regally to a chosen spot. He stared at her for a moment. That was the help she wanted. She'd need a lot more help than that before she was finished. He laughed suddenly. "You must think I'm Superman. Come on, we'll get Dad to help drag it through." And still laughing, he pulled her along the corridor into the great hall, into the huge double front doors under their dusty fanlight. Together, they wrestled back the old bolts and released the chain. It was so rusty it fell to fragments. "Now," said Roger exultantly, "we'll take a door each. Pull." And they forced the huge front doors of the Chateau de Beauserp open to the fresh air and the golden evening sun for the first time in perhaps 100 years. And that is the end of Melusine, which I had never read before and really, really enjoyed. And I hope that you enjoyed hearing me read it. If you can think of a Lynne Reid Banks book that you would like to hear, I really only know her for Indian in the Cupboard, let me know, and we'll find some room for it in the schedule. But I will see you in the next Read Aloud.